Hi, everybody. I don't know what's going on, and I swear I don't use Verizon. But anyways, we're here, and it's SPAC Chat, and it's Tuesday, and it's shortly after 2 o'clock here on the West Coast. So you know it's time for SPAC Chat, despite all the technical difficulties. We have a really, really great chat for you today. I'm just going to kick it off first with a few announcements. If you are a regular viewer of SPAC and you have never been to our amazing conference and trade show, you have an opportunity of getting a scholarship. Yes, we scholarship new attendees. I'm going to put the link up at the end of the broadcast. That application period ends on the 15th. So make sure you send that in and you may have an opportunity to join us at SPAC. Now, if you are a regular SPACite, what I want to let you know is early bird ends on October 31st, and you can go ahead and book your hotel room now. Okay, that's it for me. And today we have a great special guest host. I'm super excited to introduce her. You all know her. Come on to the stage, Beth.
Hi, everybody. Listen, it's my lucky day. Calvin is out of town and unavailable. So Corey asked if I would be able to host. And I think we should do a poll at the end and ask everybody, who did they like better as a host, Calvin or myself? I'm pretty positive that they'll probably say that I didn't talk quite as much as Calvin. But he has the sexier voice. So we'll see how it all ends up. But today, in all seriousness, is a very serious SPAC chat, and I'm happy to be a part of this conversation. I can't wait to hear what everybody has to say about this. So we are talking about the big deal about school photos, student mental health and wellness. We have with us today Amanda Rack and Crystal Maxim. They are with the Artona Group, and they are from Canada. And these two lovely ladies have worked with our special guest speaker today. And our special guest speaker is Dr. Ross Laird. Now, Dr. Ross Laird is a clinical consultant in the interwoven themes of mental health, trauma, and addictions. He has worked with hundreds of organizations over more than 35 years of professional practice and has won multiple awards for his writing, teaching, scholarship, and clinical work. He is the clinical supervisor for BC's largest funded addictions treatment program and a consultant to many others. He has taught at more than a dozen post-secondary institutions in Canada and the United States and has been involved with trauma research at the National September 11th Memorial and Museum in New York. So welcome, Ross. We are so excited that you have joined us. So Amanda and Krista, why don't you jump in here and tell everybody how it is that you came to get to know Ross?
Crystal.
You want me to go? Okay. So I'm Crystal. I'm the Director of Operations for Artona. About 3 years ago, we brought Ross in to do a workshop series with us for 3 days with most of our team. And we unpacked a lot about the personal mental health experience for both ourselves, personally, professionally, and then also for students and what they experience when they come to the camera. I personally believe, and I know Amanda does too, that as school photographers, it's critical that we care about this stuff. Students, they carry a lot when they come to school and definitely when they come to see us for their photos. And it is definitely in our best interest to care about their experience. So Ross is here today to talk a little bit about that and mental health just in a broader context too.
All right. Amanda, you're good to go? You want anything?
I'll tee you up with a little bit more. I mean, so Crystal and I live our lives outside of work the same that we do at work. And that's just, being mindful of our own situations and those of others. And it just seems like the right thing to do to be aware of this. And the goal for today is to just kind of raise awareness and connect Ross with our industry and try and lift up the level of consciousness of the industry and just, be mindful of what's happening out there for students. A lot of the times we might hear complaints that might seem like they're about our photos or our people. And Ross is going to help share and explain what might be going on kind of behind the scenes. And that can also help our team and ourselves at our work not take things so personally. Because a lot of the time it's not really about the pictures that we're doing. It's more about what's going on for children and staff in their personal lives, which is going to show up at school. And some of these topics, it helps create meaning and purpose for us at work. And when you're in those October blues, being able to pull on some of these ideas and higher meaningful things can really help motivate you to show up at 5 a.m. at the studio to go out to a shoot. It helps give a lot of compassion to see how these students might be acting out and what might be going on behind it. It's really not about us, but it can feel like that sometimes. So I hope that we can connect you with a great resource today. Our expert, Crystal, and I can give some context of what we see at Ortona and on the school picture side. And as you heard about Ross, he's an expert on this and can help really talk about the mental health aspect and how to do that respectfully and safely. And we're just happy to bring him to this platform.
All right. Thank you for those kind introductions. Hi, everybody. Thanks for hanging out for a little bit to talk about mental health, well-being, wellness, whatever you want to call it. I thought what we might do is spend a little time on what some of the challenges are around mental health right now, especially among young people, but not only among the clients and customers you work with, but also among staff for whom mental health is a growing concern as well. You're part of the dynamic, right? There's a dynamic that's created between the photographer and the subject, and that matters, and it has a very deep meaning potentially for both of them. So I thought I would talk a little bit about where we stand now with mental health, what current research says about what's happening with mental health for adults as well as adolescents and children, and then have a little chat about that, and then maybe pivot to what can you do? Like, what are some basic things you can do? So that turns out to be fairly straightforward, and I'm going to kind of start. I'm going to try to share a slide deck here, if I can. Let's see. This is a new platform for me, so I'm just going to have to find my tab.
Okay, we may need Corey to jump back in here and help if necessary. I'm not all that familiar with this platform either, Ross. There she is.
Okay, I'm gonna try. There we go.
I'm
That
here.
should be good. Are we good?
You
can see that?
Click down
No.
below. Yes, you do. And I got you all set up when you're ready.
Okay, so I'm ready. It says I'm sharing. It says StreamYard is sharing a window. So you should be able to see my window.
Not yet. Now we are.
Okay, good. So I'd like to start these sorts of discussions with a caveat for everyone, which is that when we talk about mental health, we are always talking typically in these sorts of settings about people we work with, customers, clients, people in the general public, community members, etc., and trying to develop some skill in doing that. But unavoidably and importantly, whenever we talk about mental health, we also start to think about our own lives and the situations that we bring to the work that we do and to our family lives and to ourselves, to our relationships with ourselves. So I'm going to be talking for the next 20 minutes or so about mental health challenges. And since so many people share mental health challenges, it's important that I not just kind of dive in and start talking about these things without first just encouraging you to be attentive to your own process. We're not meeting in a physical space here, so I can't observe you and see if you might be going into distress or having a reaction or having an emotional moment because something I say activates something inside of you. So just kind of be aware of that. Uh, do take care of yourself. Just if there's something I say that you find challenging, I mean, feel free to step away, right? Take a moment, do what works for you. You might not have strong reactions at all to anything that I say, but you might. You never know, right? Your reactions to these kinds of things are obviously going to be unique to you and to your lived experience, your life, what's going on in your family. I mean, most people have something going on, right? Either in themselves or in their family. And I'll give you some statistics in a minute that really illustrate that. The bottom part of this slide, I think, summarizes not only the challenges we face, but also what we can do about them, which is that we carry a lot of emotion around, most of us, and we don't process it very much. Nobody ever tells us it's okay to be emotional. People are always telling us to shut down our emotions or to control them or to do something with them so they're less. And that turns out not to be a great strategy for mental health and well-being. What does turn out to be a great strategy is having at least one person you trust who you can talk to. And that applies to everybody. You know, it applies to students who are having their photo taken for, school. It applies to adults in their regular work. It applies to families in general, right? The research about this is super encouraging. It suggests that really what you need is not necessarily years of therapy. What you might need is just one safe person. And that puts a lot of pressure on that one safe person, but potentially. But it's a good thing to have. It's important and essential to have. And it looks like you can't really make a lot of progress on your own mental health unless you have one safe person who you can talk to and process stuff with. So my goal today for the next little while is that you do the last thing on this slide, which is learn and be safe. Learn something a little bit about mental health and well-being and where we're at with that, but also do it in a way that is safe for you and comfortable and works. Okay, so here's a way to summarize all the psychological research in one slide. We have 4 kind of layers of experience that we bring. There's the resonant layer, which is stuff from childhood. And I'll explain each one of these things in a bit more detail in a second. But there's stuff from the past that we get from our families and cultures in the world, stuff that we don't choose, but just kind of is given to us because of the world we live in and the way we've grown up. And then there's our responses to the experiences we have. So this is the world of trauma and difficulty, where hard things happen, really challenging things happen, and we have a response to them. And then often if we have a combination of these first 2 things, if we have a challenging backstory in early childhood, say from our family dynamics, and then we have some traumatic experiences happen in childhood, then we often end up with mental health challenges like depression or anxiety, which are really on the rise right now. And so many of the mental health challenges people face they're easily misunderstood. I mean, people often feel like their mental health challenges are the result of chemical imbalances or genetics, and those things don't turn out to be that important in the research that's done about this. What turns out to be important is the environment we're living in, the kinds of experiences we have and have had that tend to cause us to have these sort of adaptive behaviors that are attempts to keep ourselves safe, but which often have unintended consequences. So mental health challenges like depression and anxiety, they're not simply, chemical switches in the brain or genetic inheritance. They're complicated, and they have a long backstory. We can trace that backstory pretty deeply into the history of our lives. And then the last word on this slide is the word addiction, which is the thing that nobody ever wants to talk about. Addiction is the most common human frailty, and it's the one that everybody just doesn't want to discuss. And the reason they don't want to do that typically is because it's in their lives somewhere directly. A lot of people worry they have an addiction, especially with alcohol. A lot of people do have an addiction. A lot of people have a family member who's got an addiction. And these are really complicated, troubling, sad, tragic scenarios often. And it's hard to know what to do about them. And they go on for a long time typically. And people get wounded and people have all kinds of feelings about them. And so addiction is the most difficult one, but it's one of the most important ones because it's the outcome of the first 3, right? If you put together a difficult childhood experience in the family with traumatic experiences in childhood or adolescence, with mental health adaptations as the result of those first 2 things, where you typically end up is in the world of addiction. So that's not out of the normal scope for humans, right? That's something that happens for a lot of people. And as I said, I'll show some statistics in a moment that I think point that out. So if we were to look like just a little bit deeper into how this might apply to things like kids in school, probably the most consistent and powerful bit of psychological research in the last 20 years has been about this acronym that you see there, ACE. That stands for Adverse Childhood Experience. And one of the things we know now pretty clearly is that adverse childhood experiences affect a lot of people, and they take many forms, but they're all wrapped up in this world of family and culture and humans. And so I'll come back to this one in a second, but most of us are carrying something from that. And when we're talking about kids in school, this is childhood, right? Childhood lasts till age 26 or so, right? Like we don't finish the development of the human nervous system and brain until about age 26, 28, thereabouts. And so this whole period is all the developmental period. So adverse childhood experiences means stuff that we face, adversity that we face all the way through this period, from early childhood through adolescence through early adulthood. It's a lot of time. And what's interesting about this is two things. One, so many people have these experiences and they have lasting impact. And small interventions, small positive interventions can have huge consequences, huge positive consequences in the lives of people who are struggling with adversity. So that's a really encouraging bit of research. People don't need to be in therapy forever, as I said a minute ago. People need often a very small intervention. And when you're talking about a situation of a photographer and a subject in a school setting, that's a very small intervention. Many possibilities there for single moments of positive growth and change in the life of a person who might have a really positive experience, as opposed to something that just adds to their adversity and challenge, right? So most of us are familiar with the language that we use in trauma, right? The fight or flight response. Many people are quite educated these days about trauma. So trauma is the experience where you lose the ability to cope and something happens to you that exceeds your capacity to take in or to manage or to get through safely. And you'll see different language out on the internet about how many kinds of trauma there are and what they're all called. But really, there's two kinds of trauma. There's hypotrauma and hypertrauma. Hypotrauma is where you kind of collapse and withdraw, and that flight or that freeze, where you just kind of try to get away from it. And hyper response in trauma is where you try to speed up instead of slowing down. You speed up to try to get away from it, stay ahead of it, right? Orienting and fighting and anxiety. So you could say, depression is a kind of hypo trauma response, and anxiety is a hyper trauma response. And everybody will have their own particular flavor of that. But when we think about the experiences that shape people most profoundly in their lives, that determine their direction and what happens for them in their lives, a lot of that's trauma. A lot of that is the thing that happened that we don't talk about, that's hard to resolve, but's there, and you can see its thread weaving its way through your life. A lot of people have unresolved trauma, and it's like this kind of crucible that just kind of bakes away inside of us. And for most people, that trauma begins in adolescence. For some people, it begins in childhood, but for most people, it begins in adolescence. And then, we have this rising mental health challenge now, right? As I talked about a minute ago, we have rates of depression and anxiety that are higher than they've ever been, potentially. We have a lot of people struggling with lots of different things, adapting to a strange world that's full of difficult circumstances. And for young people today, especially, they, as you probably know, are not really able to just slide into being a kid, right? They have social media anxiety, they have climate change anxiety, kind of constant rumble of climate change, fear, and anxiety. It's a big deal. And And we're dealing with a lot of young people who are just struggling every day, all the time. And it's hard to know what to do about this exactly. And people like me have lots of solutions potentially, but it's hard to change the world, right? And so because of that, we're also seeing the rates of addiction go up. And addiction also starts in adolescence. We tend to think of addiction as kind of a late adolescent or adult kind of thing, but for everybody with an addiction, basically, like 99.99% of people with addiction, where they started is like age 12. So addiction has these deep roots, goes back a long way, and impacts people in like surprising ways in the long term, as you probably know from your family. So here's some statistics about this, right? About like more than 60% of people have at least one adverse childhood experience. I'll give you a list of what those experience, what is an ACE in a minute. 35% of people have more than two, and 16% of people have at least four. That's a lot of people who've struggled with some kind of adversity. The vulnerability that you get from this is enduring. So when you have adversity in childhood, it doesn't go away. You have to kind of deal with it if you can, but it becomes a vulnerability that you carry for your whole life. And just like mental health and mental illness is kind of like this too. Mental illness doesn't really kind of go away for most people. It's something that you learn to befriend or get better at dealing with or get a better relationship with if you want to improve your symptoms. But it's not something that just vanishes, right? Because it's part of you. It's part of your life experience, your history. So a lot of people have these early childhood experiences. You add up those numbers, and that's most people. And then if you look at, come on, click. If you look at the trauma exposure amounts, 5% of people have a diagnosis. But most people with trauma don't have a diagnosis. So another 8 or more percent of people probably have the formal psychiatric term PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. But about 65% of people have been exposed to trauma, which means they've had a traumatic experience, whether they call it PTSD or not. Something profound has happened that has been really challenging and really adverse for them, typically starting again in childhood or adolescence. And then, okay, so the world of mental health. This has gone from a large number of people 10 years ago to a massive number of people now. So somewhere between 18 to 25% of people struggle with a mental health challenge. That's like a quarter of the population. And it's probably more than that because more than half of people who have a mental health challenge don't say anything about it. They don't report it to their physician or anywhere that it could be tracked. And of those who do report it, about 37% or maybe a bit more, they report that it didn't help. Like if they talked to the doctor, it didn't help, or if they went to a counselor, it didn't help, or whatever. The average number of counseling sessions that a person attends is 1. People will go to counseling for 1 session, and then they'll be uncomfortable, and they'll say, it's not for me. I don't like it. I didn't like the person, whatever. It's not really about the person or the process. It's about discomfort with kind of opening up all that stuff, which I get, right? It's hard. And rates of anxiety about opening up and talking about stuff have doubled in the last decade or so, more than doubled in some places. And on top of that, you have about 25% of adults struggling with loneliness. And the rates among youth are higher than that. In fact, the rates of, these are the average rates, right, in Canada and the US. But among university students, they're double this. So among the adolescent population, it's roughly double. That's a lot. And then addiction, we have, come on, click. So more than 20% of the population of Canada and the US meet the diagnostic criteria for having a substance use disorder. Wow, that's a lot of people, right? And now, in Canada, I don't know what the stats are in the US, they'd be similar, but in Canada, 1 in 4 deaths of adolescents is directly related to opioid overdose. So this is a lot, right? This is a lot that we're struggling with here. And where it gets constellated is in this middle adolescent period from about 12 to 17, where all this stuff comes together. People have been through these adverse childhood experiences. They have had some kind of traumatic stuff happen. They're trying to deal with it in the only way they know how, which is by developing mental health challenges. And they're starting to pick up addictions. Those are going to pick up addiction. And so people are doing, this is how people get by. We tend to think of mental health challenges and especially addictions as like personal problems or a failure to do something or a failure to be resilient in some way. But the reality is that's not how this works. Mental health adaptations and addictions are attempts to resolve unbearable symptoms that people feel. Like they're not character defects or problems in coping. These are the best things people can come up with to deal with intolerable circumstances. And since these statistics include so many people, that's a lot of people who are dealing with what they experience on a daily basis as intolerable circumstances. And so like in our session here today, that's probably either you or a loved one or someone in your family who's got at least one or more of these things going on. We don't sort of get to escape it, really. It's just part of the human situation right now. There's a lot of this going on. So I mentioned that I would say something about adverse childhood experiences and what counts as an adverse childhood experience. So here's the list. You can probably find yourself on the list. Probably find your experience on the list here. Since like, 60 or 70% of people have at least one of these, right? So that's a lot of stuff that people are carrying. And when you see them, as students coming for their photo, you of course don't know anything about this. And it would be, of course, inappropriate to ask about it. Some of them might share it in ways that are sudden and strange. But this is what people are carrying. And if they had an outlet for it, if they had a way to deal with it, they would have dealt with it. But the fact that there are so many people and they're not getting help, and they're continuing to be exposed to the circumstances which perpetuate their struggle. You have this little moment with them. I'll say more about that in a second. But last statistic, this is from Canada. It would be similar in the US. I just want to point out, this shows the rise in anxiety disorders since 2012 to 2022. So especially social phobia has more than doubled. That is dramatic and very frightening from a mental health point of view. They're also dealing in the photography setting with a highly social kind of process about someone's identity and the attempt to capture that identity and to that desired self-expression in a moment with peers at school. That is a pretty socially provocative kind of situation. And it makes sense to me that a lot of kids are just having panic attacks all the time doing this. Why not? That's the deal, right? That's what many people are dealing with. So here's the key dynamic. And I'm going to pause after this. I have some thoughts about what to do, but I want to stop here because I've gone through a lot of gear really fast. And I want to pause for questions and thoughts about this. But here's what we have as adults and with adolescents. We have this kind of context, which is the stuff that we carry from our families and our cultures and our genders and history and the way the world is. And then with that kind of a lot of the times is quite destabilizing. If you grow up in a family with a parent with a mental illness, which half of people do, or you grow up in a family where there's an alcoholic parent, which probably more than half of people do. You have some stuff you're carrying then from childhood that you have to figure out in adolescence. And that stuff doesn't set you up well for navigating adolescence without harm. So on top of the early childhood exposure in your family, what you get is some trauma, either in the family, because often, if you've got a mentally ill parent or parent with addiction, often there's domestic violence that goes along with that too, right? There's certainly neglect and emotional abuse. So you get traumatized by all that stuff. And then it just there's this kind of crucible of emotional stuff that's unaddressed that you carry around all the time. And what do you like? You can't just carry it and not have consequences. You can't carry it and pretend that nothing will happen, right? Of course, you end up with a mental health challenge. You end up with a mental illness. And if your trauma is more of the kind of escape and hide type trauma, then you're more likely to pick up depression. And if your trauma is more the high intensity runaway kind of trauma, then you're more likely to develop anxiety as a coping mechanism. Your body will choose what you do. The mind doesn't choose it. The body chooses it. Body's trying to get you safe. Body's trying to get you out of stressful situations. It does what evolution has told it to do, has taught it to do over the last several million years of human evolution. It does that thing that it knows how to do. And of course, if this goes on long enough, then you end up in the world of addiction, which just fuels this kind of constant coping over and over and over again. And we could spend a whole session just talking about how the different substances people choose embody the trauma responses that they have. So here's the key insight, right? The responses that people have to these troubling circumstances, they lock in. They're not voluntary. They're not conscious. People don't have a choice about it. And people are kind of right now in their trauma, living in the moment of it. And anything can provoke that trauma. Any moment of emotional intensity can provoke that trauma. And so, since school photos is one of the most intense moments during the school year for a lot of students, this is a pretty provocative moment. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute there. I said that I would pause for thoughts and questions and reflections. Let's do that before I give you a couple of suggestions about what could you do about all this? Not how you fix it, but how could you respond to it in a way that's healthy? Okay, thoughts, reflections, questions.
So I wrote down and had some thoughts as you were talking and going through your slides. And one of the things that stood out to me was when you said over 60% have one exposure to adversity in childhood.
Yeah.
And then you gave that list of exposures. And then, I mean, I feel like particularly for the children that are in their adolescence now, that the bullying, community violence, natural disasters. I mean, look at the southeastern United States right now, how terrible that is. And witnessing acts of terrorism, that these kids have seemed to have a whole bunch of that packed in.
Yeah, more.
And more than that.
Yeah.
And it just, I never looked at it in that type of way and having statistics attached to it.
Yeah, and we think, every generation has its challenges, and we tend to dismiss this kind of thing as, oh, well, this is just what it is for this generation. No, it's different for this generation. There's a lot more going on for this generation. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other number that I
have a question.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I have a question. have a question. So Ross, what did COVID and having to be on lockdown, how did that affect our students now?
Yeah, so that has had a huge impact, as you probably see wherever you go now. Many young people, they kind of lost a couple of years of development. And at whatever age they were at when COVID hit, they lost the next 2 years. So there's this period, like when you're up till about age 9, you can get most of what you need developmentally from within the family. But starting age 9, during this period where the nervous system goes through a kind of transformation that neurologists call brain pruning, which takes you all the way to 26. From that period, from 9 to 26, you can't do it inside the family. You need a community. You need like peers and extended relationships beyond the family to make this work developmentally. So kids need that physical presence of other people for their own development. So if you lose that for a couple of years, depending on where you are in your development, you'll lose a different thing. So some kids will lose a sense of bonding and intimacy and the ability to develop friendships. That's like 9 to 12. Some kids will lose the ability to navigate peer relationships and to figure out their own self-expression. So that's like 12 to 14. Some kids will lose the ability to figure out their own, how to separate from peer groups and how to stand on your own. and to be a person who is unique and different, even though you're part of a community that's like 15, 16. So there's all these, like, you can go all the way up to the end, right? To 28 with this. So there's these different phases of development, and depending on how old you were as a child when COVID hit, you're losing a couple of years of crucial development, which means you have to get it back later. But then how are you going to get it back later? Life moves on. You go on to another developmental age. And unless somebody points out to you, hey, you missed this part, right? Then you're going to be stuck. And so many young people are really, really stuck right now because of that.
Yeah. It's kind of terrifying when you lay it out like that, isn't it? Especially for those of us that are parents, children, and children in those ages. And I can see with both of my daughters at what age they were, and then the things that they've had to overcome, right, in the past couple of years coming out of COVID. I see exactly what you're saying about.
Yeah, it's a lot to deal with, and it can be quite overwhelming. The one thing that I'm always like, people in my field, we're always like relentlessly positive about this kind of stuff. We deal with the toughest stuff, like emotionally, trauma and addictions and all this really heavy stuff. But everybody in my field is super positive because we see these examples of people healing and growing all the time. And it's not that hard, which I'll talk about in a minute. But I mean, it can be hard. I don't mean to say it's easy. It's just that it's pretty straightforward to do. You can do it if you put your mind to it. So I am always optimistic because we are built to be together in communities of people who are like-minded and who are working together, and we'll get back to that. But it takes us some trauma usually to get there. I notice there's a question from Nick about a specific age group we should be concerned with. Like right now, you mean? I think that's what you mean. Yeah, I mean, I think in general, the age that we should be concerned with the most is early childhood, age 0 to 4. And we could spend a week. We could just stay on this live stream for a week talking about all that. That's the foundational part that we should try not to miss with kids. And the other age, the age that you'll see in your work, is age 12. And that's the age where there's this kind of recursion that happens in development where you go through 0 to 4, then you leave those things there, those developmental things there, and you move on to other things. But then you revisit those early things starting age 12. And so age 12 is a really turbulent time. That's why all these emotions. There was, the part 2 of the emotion movie came out recently. You know, the cartoon movie with the emotion? I haven't seen it, but Inside Out or Outside In, whatever it's called. But I think that's a really good way to describe what happens there around that age. There's all this turbulence because people are revisiting and trying to redo what they missed in the early childhood period. So 12 is really important. And the final age is age 15, where you can't just tell kids what to do anymore. You have to negotiate with them. You have to, everything's a discussion, and there's lots of opportunity there for growth and change, but it's also a stressful time for everybody who works with kids that age. Right. So those 3 ages are particularly key, I would say. All right. Shall I say something about things?
One other question coming to us from someone who is viewing us but cannot type their question because they're driving. They're being good. So they sent it to me more via text. So they said, is there an easy or a tip that you would provide when you notice you have a student walking up to the camera and they're anxious? Is there, what do you suggest when you can obviously see a kid is anxious or in duress? What might be something a photographer could use to at least capture their best moment at that time?
Yeah. Best thing you can do is be a calm, attentive, friendly, positive presence. The dynamic matters a lot. The dynamic between you and another person influences you and influences the other person. So often we think about things we can do to or for the other person, but the real ticket to supporting someone in distress is not about what we do with the other person or for the other person. It's what we do in ourselves so that we can not be reactive. We see somebody reactive, we get reactive. Don't be reactive. Take a breath, slow down, ground yourself, feel your feet, walk mindfully and slowly, carefully, be aware of your own reactivity. And if you can bring your own reactivity down to zero so that you are just calm and friendly and open and positive, that is probably the best thing you can do. There's a whole set. A lot of the training that I do for organizations is about, okay, what do you say in those? Then what do you say? And how do you deal with it when they say something back? And then how do you guide them towards safety? All these kind of things. Those are important. But they all depend on being able to just tune into yourself and notice how you're feeling and what you're reacting to. And of course, you will get more reactive. You'll get unconsciously and automatically reactive to a student who unconsciously reminds you of you at the same age, right? Especially if you had some trauma or difficulty at that age. Any student who's going through the trauma or difficulty that you went through at that age, you will immediately pick it up. It'll be like a immediate resonance. You might not even be consciously aware of it, but you will see it and you'll go whammo, and you'll go straight into your own reactivity. So you have to be careful about that kind of stuff. And if you can, notice yourself and notice your own reactivity when it happens and bring it down. And even when you haven't been reactive, but you notice somebody else is, still check in with yourself, bring your reactivity down so that you can be cool, relaxed, friendly, grounded, those kind of things. That's the first and most important step in supporting other people. Now, just in terms of, what I can say in 10 minutes or less about what we might do about this current situation, how we might support ourselves, support our colleagues, support our students, support clients, customers, all this. I do have some thoughts about that, and I'm going to share them. Whoops. Hang on. This took a second before, so just let me know if it doesn't pop up. But let me know if it does. Can you see my slide now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, I always think about, okay, there are some basic things we can do here. And the 4 kind of research-backed things that we can do are fairly straightforward. The first is to allow people to have a sense of belonging, to encourage a sense of belonging. I'll say a little bit more about each one of these in a moment. But here's the 4. Here's the things we're aiming for. These 4 things match the first 4 ages of childhood development from birth up to age 4. Kids age 4 want to be empowered. Kids age 1 want to belong. Kids age 2 need people to trust. Kids age 3 need safe parents, safe expression. So, I said a while ago about the way that there's this recursive development where kids go through ages 0 to 4, and then they redo them again starting age 12 to 15 or so. So this is related to that. So we're trying to establish a ground for human experience. And 100 years of research has shown us that these are the 4 things you need to be a healthy human. You need a sense of belonging. You need to know and to feel that you belong somewhere with some people. You need at least one person you trust, which is how I started this session. You need one person at least to trust. You need to feel safe to be yourself, to be who you are, and to express yourself in ways that work for you. And you need a sense of empowerment so that you can make choices and you can do what you want in your life. So each of these things is super key, and they are not therapy or counseling. They're basic human things that we can all do in our interactions with other people. So if we look at each one of them in turn, right? Just each one of these things, I've provided some like basic statements that we can make about helping people to feel what it is we're trying to get to. So for belonging, I think that to the extent that people can feel that they have some agency over the process, say in photography, that they're welcomed and that they are not just, widgets to go through the assembly line, but are made to feel like this is a special moment for them, potentially. This is a moment of self-expression, and it's important and people take it seriously, and it is for them. It is their moment. That's really important, right? Situations like photography. And And for people who, act out, who have inappropriate behavior, which we could do a whole session on, or a couple of sessions, we need also to have boundaries around belonging, right? We can't have safe spaces with safe people if any behavior is acceptable, right? We have to have spaces where there are limits on behavior that people can do. So I talked with Amanda and Crystal in our workshop about languaging around, how do you manage challenging behaviors in the photography setting, right? And that's challenging for sure. But yeah, I mean, boundaries make everybody safe. Kids need boundaries. And one of the big challenges of parenting these days is that parents don't really know how to set boundaries in a way that would be helpful for kids. A lot of parents don't. And the second thing is, trust. How to be a trustworthy person, how to be helpful to others, and in a way that you can be dependable and reliable. I particularly like the middle statement here. What do you need? Tell me what you need. What would work for you, right? Here's what we need. We can't take the photograph outside. We can't, do this other thing. But here's what we can do. Meet us. What can we do for you? Here's the limits. What can we do? Right? I think this is super, super important. Giving people a chance to express their uniqueness in a relationship that's a dynamic between the photographer and the subject. And of course, that happens normally. But in a school setting where it's really fast paced, that can be really hard to do, right? Everybody's going through in the same way, usually. So it can be really hard. But I really like this question. What do you need? Also, like relationship tip, this is the relationship question too, right? The relationship question is not telling your partner what you need. They probably know. The relationship question is asking your partner what they need, right? Starting there. That's a much, much better way to do these things, usually. Okay, so trust, safety, giving people an opportunity to feel safe in expressing their individuality in school photos and other places, right? Giving them a chance to discuss the process a little bit, to help them understand that this is not just a formulaic thing. This is about self-expression of individual identity, and there's limits on how much you can kind of do that in a photo setting, right? But let's help one another kind of make this work for everyone. How can we make this work for everyone? This is a safe space. Also, one of the things that I talked with Amanda and Crystal about in our workshop was you need a safe space where people can go off for a minute to decide and sit and reflect and gather themselves in a moment of distress. This is a really important thing for settings, professional settings that are non-therapy. They can be therapeutic if you provide safe people and you provide safe space. So one of the things I'm always recommending for organizations is you need a little alcove somewhere during this process where somebody can go and sit and take a minute if they have a strong reaction. They're not just going to be rushed through. They need a minute. If they need a minute and they start to cry or they have a panic attack or whatever, they need a minute. And you can train staff to sit with them for a minute and be really helpful, non-therapists, but therapeutically involved in the conversation with someone in distress. I think safe space is super key, and it does depend on having safe people who can direct the person to a safe space and who can maybe even sit with them or at least help them, be okay in the safe space. So people aren't just left alone to struggle, right? That's a whole skill set, being able to be a safe person, to create and cultivate safe space. But it's really, really key to improving the mental health outcomes in these kind of scenarios. And the last one is, empowerment. If you think about what kids need around age 3, 4, they need to feel their empowerment in the world, which is why they bite and kick and punch. They need to feel like they can make a difference. They can make an impact on the world. So much of the first 3 items on this slide, belonging, trust, and safety, so much of that leads to the 4th one, which is empowerment. And so many people feel disempowered these days. And it comes out in weird ways. I mean, I was talking a while ago about the relationship between substance use and trauma response, and you can look at the substances people choose as a response to a certain type of trauma. So alcoholism is a response that is a trauma response that is connected to fighting and aggression and to being able to feeling like you can fight back against injustice or something that was done to you to harm you. And people with alcoholism are always trying to fight back, always trying to win, always trying to be in charge. And they're trying to be empowered. And the reason they're trying to be empowered is because they feel disempowered. And drinking is the only way they feel empowered. And a lot of people like this. And you know lots of them, probably. So one of the things we need to do is, in the situation we have now, just in general in our society, is to help people feel a bit more empowered. The rates of drinking have gone up dramatically since COVID. And there are a lot of people who drink every day and use drinking in the evening after they get home from work, for example, as a way to kind of just recalibrate and come back to themselves. And that is not a healthy way to use alcohol. Using a substance to manage your emotional life, which is kind of the definition of addiction. And then we have a lot of people also who get drunk on the weekend. They kind of store up the stress during the week, and then they kind of blow off steam during the weekend and they get drunk, and that is also not great. Same kind of dynamic there of not being able to deal with your stress, so the substance does it for you. So that is the definition of addiction. And we have, like, in North America, we have, I don't know, probably a couple 100 million people with this dynamic. It's totally normalized in our society, and people don't think anything of it. They think it's totally normal and fine and healthy. And of course, we know now it's not. But a lot of people are doing this. So what that means is there's a lot of people who feel disempowered right now. And alcohol is one way they get their power back. So one of the things we can do about that in the photography space with kids in school is help people feel like, this can be a really empowering thing, having your photo taken right now. And we want to do it in a way that works really well for you so that you feel good about it. And you can have a strong emotion about this process. Totally fine. We'll help you do that. We'll help you navigate that. We have a safe space. We have safe people. We have people who are trained in kind of dealing with kids who have panic attacks, right? We can do that. And we're gonna take it slow. And we're gonna make sure this works for you. And we're gonna make sure this is a positive experience for you as much as we can. So those kinds of things, there's a lot more sort of deep dive detail to be done here, of course. But, this is the basics. This is the foundation, right, of where the whole thing is. If you want to help people with their mental health, this is what you need to work on with them. Help them feel like they belong. Help them find people they can trust. Help them be safe, and help them to be empowered. And of course, that applies to us too, right? Everybody in the world who is struggling, because underneath all of these things is the early childhood exposure and the trauma and the mental illness and the addiction that so many of us are carrying. And so if we can make some traction on some of these themes here, then we can make some traction on the underlying causes of our distress. This is the antidote to the distress, these kinds of things. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing there because we have 5 minutes left, and I want to give a little bit of time for thoughts, reflections, discussion, whatever. Yeah, Corey.
One.
Yeah.
Let's go with what we know most people struggle with the most, especially parents. Screen time.
Mhm.
Screen time. And like, I live in California, so the governor just passed a laws that schools will not be allowing to have phones in the classroom next year. My husband,
we
of
have that here
course,
too.
who's an administrator, is like, this is going to be a nightmare to manage.
Yeah.
But let's talk, because we have a lot of people out there who've got kids. Let's talk about screen time and what are some strategies we can use to help prevent our kids becoming so addicted.
Okay, yeah, sure. So 2 things. First of all, every presentation I make is designed for, like, people out there in the world, clients, customers, whatever, business partners. I work a lot with organizations. It always starts out as working with those people, and it always ends with us, our own personal lives. We always end up talking about our own personal lives, which is totally normal and good. I like that. Yeah, the the screen time issue is a huge issue because it provides substitute self-regulation for young people. And the primary developmental task of young people is self-regulation. The difficulty is that parents have been largely now drawn into the world of screen time as well. And so their self-regulation is also managed by screens. So this is the hard part. And this is why working with parent groups is really hard for me when I do it, is like your fate as a parent is having the same difficult, tense conversation several times a day for about a decade, right? Like parents always want to say, we'll set new rules, or we'll tell our kids this is the way it is. And that's not how it works with childhood development. You have to have the same conversation every day. And yes, yesterday you had that conversation, everybody agreed, and then not one day went by, and then suddenly people are back to doing the same thing they agreed they wouldn't do. And it's immensely frustrating as a parent. But as a parent, your fate is the endless discussion around tech right now. What parents can do to reduce their tech use, what kids can do to reduce their tech use, what kids can do to get outside more, to be more physically active, typically facilitated by parents. As parents, you can't just tell your kids, you go and you must do it. You have to do it with them these days. And so it's a conversation for the whole family that you have to have endlessly now to fight back against the growing tide of massive impact of technology on the development of young people. It's much worse than, I mean, you see lots of sort of doom-like news articles about this, but those are correct. Like this is a really bad situation for young people. And so we do have to do something. Some young people are taking the lead on this and trying to do stuff about it on their own, but they need help. And we need to be more on it. You can't just ban phones in schools. You have to have teachers training on how to provide substitute self-regulation for kids, which means you have to change the school system to be not one where kids just sit in desks and listen to teachers, but are involved in the development of their own educational pathways in a way that's more organic and self-regulated. So like this is connected to a lot of different things. And so I agree that we do need to do something about it, but what we need to do doesn't start with the students, the kids, it starts with us. And again, with our own ability as parents and teachers to step in to this situation and build deeper relationships with the people we work with or our kids.
Okay, I have another question from the driving person. Is there anything parents can do to prepare students for picture day in the hopes of reducing anxiety?
Yeah, lots. Talk to them about it. Kids need about 30 to 60 minutes of emotionally focused conversation every day from parents. The average, there was a study done a couple of years ago showing that the average mom, it was with comparing moms and dads. The average mom spent something like 3.5 minutes per day talking to her kids about non-task related items, like talking about feelings, talking about just how did your day go, how are you feeling, right? About 3.5 minutes. And the average dad spent less than 90 seconds, right? So yeah, people aren't doing enough emotional conversation, right? And kids need a lot of this. So who knows what the individual reactions of kids are going to be in the run up to photo day, but parents could probably easily spend, a couple of hours in the week running up to photo day to talk about kids' feelings about this, right? 20, 30 minutes more every day. And I don't think we should kind of barge in and force our kids to talk about stuff. But this is another problem, because if you're not in the habit as a parent of talking to your kids about feelings, and suddenly one day you get interested in it, that's not going to work very well, right? Like parents need to kind of ease into this over the whole lifetime of the child, and starting it later is harder. So I think this is, again, a complicated thing. I think that kids can have so many different reactions to photo day, and we can't make any specific guidelines about what they might say or do or feel, but definitely they're going to have feelings. So we should talk to them about their feelings about this. And so Nick asks, what is emotionally focused conversation? Emotionally focused conversation is, how are you feeling? Here's how I'm feeling. What do you feel? Right? Not solution focused, not advice focused, not fix it focused, but emotion focused conversation. Tell me more about that feeling. What do you feel in your body? What like, it's complicated. It sounds like there's two parts to this. Like there's several parts to this feeling, right? Like counseling skills. If you want to get better at emotionally focused conversation, like look into the world of person-centered counseling skills where people just talk about feelings, right? Sounds like you're feeling, looks like you feel. I get the sense that you're feeling. I feel, right? Using feeling words rather than intellectual words. It's a whole skill set, and it works toward probably the most powerful thing we can do in the human relationship dynamic, which is empathy. Being able to sense and interact with the emotional world of another person. This is the most powerful human capacity we have, empathy. People who are good at empathy have the best relationships. That's kind of like a one-to-one deal. Amanda.
I've got an actionable thing for parents to help students prepare. We have made some tools. They're called storyboards. And it's a visual kind of chart that you can use to help front load students. I've seen it used a lot for students with diverse abilities. And so it'll be like a visual walkthrough of, what picture day is going to look like. Like you will go in the gym, then you will get your name card, then you will wait in line, then you will see a background that looks like this. A flash will go off. Follow the instructions with the photographer. And I think something that we can do as photographers, because it's a bit unique to what your set looks like and what your process is, but if you can process in the States, if you can make a one-page kind of storyboard, that could be a really helpful resource that you can give to schools before the events happen. And even for little kids, that'll give them a heads up of what to expect. And that might help front load and help students prepare.
Yeah.
So Amanda, you guys are currently doing that? You've done the storyboard?
We have tried. I'm not saying that we're doing a great job. We're doing our best that we can. And I have a couple of resources that we can send to schools about grad photos, about high school photos, or about elementary photos. So it's a little bit different for every process, but
yeah,
gives them a heads up.
I'm big on languaging and signage and guiding and stuff. And I think those things can be so helpful. And the way they're phrased is so important. One of the things I always discourage people from using is the phrase trigger warning or trigger alert. Don't use that. It implies that you will be, it triggers like something that you are subject to. It happens to you rather than something that you have control over and that you have agency about as a person. So I started off this session with this slide about please take care of yourself. Please do it, go as deep as you need, do it, all these kind of, this is about you and encouraging you to take responsibility for your own mental health and well-being during this session. And that kind of languaging can be used in so many different settings where people might have some anxiety. If they're told, if they get the sense that, oh yeah, I have some control over my reactions here. I have some control over what happens to me in this moment, how I feel. Oh yeah, that's super good. They'll do it.
Well, I can tell you, Ross, that I am feeling extremely grateful that you did this for us today and that you joined us and gave up your time to help our community and to put some insights and a lot of information out there for our members in the photography industry. I think it's been super helpful, and I feel great appreciation for you.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I'm always happy to talk about these kinds of things. It's important, right? And we're all trying to be better parents and better teachers, better photographers, and I'm happy to contribute a small bit toward that goal.
Amazing.
I again appreciate you for your time, your energy. Amanda, I want to say thank you so much for bringing such a great resource to SPAC and allowing us to have this conversation and helping us find someone like Ross to share. It really, I think you've impacted in the last hour, even if it's not just school pictures, maybe it's someone a photography business and you see one of your employees struggle. I mean, this is a crazy time right now. We're all dealing with a lot.
We're all dealing with stuff, and that's why these presentations always end up with us thinking about our own lives and our own situations, because we're all dealing with stuff, right? And we all need a little help in nudging ourselves toward facing and grappling with some of the challenges we face. Yeah.
Well, thank you again so much. Okay, folks, I'm going to wrap this up. Beth, thanks for stepping in for Calvin today.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you again, Ross. Thank you, Amanda. We lost
Thank you,
Crystal
everyone.
along the way, but I'm sure Crystal's watching, and much thanks to you all. And I hope you all have a wonderful week. Thanks for watching SPAC Chat. Bye, everybody.
Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye.